November the 22nd, 1942, General Sir Harold Alexander, Commander-in-Chief in the Middle East, reviewed the 9th Division AIF at Gaza in Palestine and told its men, "There is one thought I will cherish above all others. Under my command fought the 9th Australian Division. This is the story of how that high praise was earned. It is the story of one of the decisive battles of the Second World War, El Alamein. Alamein was fought by British, New Zealand, South African, Indian, Greek, French and Australian troops of the 8th Army. But the key role was played by these men of the 2nd AIF's 9th Division, the Rats of Tobruk. 6 months before that historic parade, there was leave in Beirut and served like home. A welcome change for the men of the 9th Division, who had been training and constructing defenses in Syria after their epic defense of Tobruk. They thought they had finished with the desert and the dust and the flies. They thought they were going home to defend Australia. But suddenly the call to action in the Western Desert came again. It was a grave emergency, one of the gravest in the war. Rommel's victorious forces had overwhelmed the 8th Army, stormed Tobruk and thrust deep into Egypt. Only the hastily manned defenses at Alamein stood between the enemy and the Suez Canal. To reinforce those defenses, the 9th Division was rushed from Syria. The Alamein line, 60 miles west of Alexandria, stretched for 38 miles of flat desert between the Mediterranean and the impassable salt marshes of the Qattara Depression. The Australians took up their position on the right flank beside the sea. They knew the situation was desperately dangerous and that they had little time to prepare. Rommel's German and Italian army outnumbered the weary and battered 8th Army by 2 to 1. Stuka dive bombers gave the men of the 9th a harsh but familiar welcome. General Morsehead studied maps of the Alamein position. His troops, their trenches dug and their guns sighted, waited with the confidence of veterans for whatever the morrow might bring. They didn't have long to wait. They were chosen to strike the first blow back at Rommel since the long retreat began. On July the 10th, the Victorians and South Australians of the 26th Brigade, the 2nd 23rd, the 2nd 24th, and the 2nd 48th Battalions were launched up the coast road and the railway line against the key ridge of Tel Eliza. Tensely, they crouch in their sandbagged posts as 0 hour approaches. And now the Rats of Tobruk go forward with the bayonet. This is the sight the enemy had learned in Tobruk to dread. The Rats of Tobruk break and scatter an entire Italian division at the point of the bayonet. The Australians repulse a desperate counterattack launched by the German troops. By midday on July the 11th, Tel Eliza Ridge is firmly held in Australian hands. 1,500 prisoners have been taken and heavy casualties inflicted on the enemy. Deep salient has been driven into the Axis lines. The Australians have brought the Axis advance to a standstill and put a stop to the run of British disasters. Rommel is worried. He has been hit hard. German reinforcements are rushed north to meet the developing Australian threat. Now the 24th Brigade launches an attack to widen the salient. The stage is set for a terrible and bloody struggle for a dusty rise ominously known as Ruin Ridge. Twice Australians stand triumphant on the ridge, and twice they are forced off it. Now the West Australians of the 2nd 28th storm it again. Stuka dive bombers scream down in wave after wave to blast the Australian positions. Rommel watches the battle develop. The West Australians wipe out a German battalion, but German tanks counterattack heavily. British tanks try unsuccessfully to find a way through the minefields to aid the West Australians, now completely surrounded. Grim messages flash back from Ruin Ridge. We are in trouble. There are tanks all round us. Rock the artillery in. At length, as the panzers close in for the kill, comes the last message of all. We have got to give in. Only 92 men of the gallant 2nd 28th survive, but they have made the enemy pay a terrible price. This first British offensive at Alamein failed to break through, but it was the beginning of the end for Rommel. Behind the lines in the hot and dusty tents of desert hospitals, doctors and nurses work tirelessly to succor the wounded. Hundreds of men owe their lives to the skill and devotion of the men and women of the medical corps and the nursing service. After the July battles, Churchill visited the 8th Army, accompanied by the new commanders he had appointed. General Alexander, Commander-in-Chief, and General Montgomery, Commander of the 8th Army. The 9th Division knew his visit portended great events ahead. In October, it was clear that another British offensive was imminent. The first sign was the great increase in air activity. Kitty Hawks of the Royal Australian Air Force played a gallant part in the battle for air superiority. Ceaselessly, the planes of number 3 and number 450 RAAF squadrons took off with the Desert Air Force to sweep the skies and attack the enemy communications. By the middle of October, complete air superiority had been won. Rommel's greatest problem was supplies, which had to be brought across the Mediterranean. Tobruk and Tripoli, where enemy supplies were unloaded, took a terrific pounding from our Air Force. The ships bringing in the supplies were attacked at sea. 200,000 tons of Axis shipping was sunk. In the Western Desert, Montgomery was building up the 8th Army to strike a blow which this time would be decisive. A new British tank force was secretly assembled and prepared for the breakthrough. The 9th Australian Division was to have the key task of forcing a corridor through the enemy minefields for the tanks. As D-Day approached, the air offensive was stepped up. More than 1,000 guns were assembled. The field ambulances knew they would be busy. Water was even more precious and a good deal scarcer than petrol. Soldiers wrote what might be their last letters home. Pay books were collected before the men went into the attack. All along the Alamein line, the guns stood ready. In Berlin, Dr. Goebbels organized a press conference for Rommel, now rewarded with his Field Marshal's baton. So well was Montgomery's secret kept that Rommel was still in Berlin when the balloon went up in the desert. It was his last hour of glory. On October the 22nd, slouch-hatted General Montgomery issued his final orders. They gave the most important role to the Australians in the north. From army to corps to division to brigade to tank and artillery regiments and to infantry battalions, the orders were passed down. Every man in the 8th Army knew what he had to do on the morrow. And one set, October the 23rd, the night of the attack. The infantry are waiting, with their nerves strung tense, waiting for the barrage from 1,000 guns which will herald the assault. To 0 hour. Mines ring the enemy defenses. PM. On your feet. Fix bayonets. When dawn breaks on October the 24th, the 9th Division has driven a wedge 3 miles deep into the enemy lines and inflicted heavy casualties. The guns prepare the way for a new attack. On October the 25th, the Australians strike north towards the sea. South Australians of the 2nd 48th Battalion seize the high ground of Trig 29. This time the Stukas meet their match. The German defenders of Trig 29 suffered 300 casualties. The Australians have secured a jumping-off point for a further thrust towards the coast. But the tanks are still waiting for the breakthrough. Rommel has rushed back from Berlin to take command. From Trig 29, 5 Australian battalions thrust towards the sea in a bold encircling movement. Tanks join in what all know is the decisive action. The bulk of the German forces have been drawn north to oppose the Australians and are fighting with bitter fury. The Australians lose heavily. Some battalions are reduced to 40 and 50 men. Said the official record, they fought themselves to a standstill till flesh and blood could stand no more. Then they went on fighting. But even in the heat of battle, an Australian finds time to assist a wounded German. Weary and dispirited, enemy prisoners shuffle to the rear. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties, and the men of the field ambulances toil ceaselessly to bring in the wounded. Wounded German prisoners are carried in. Friend and foe are joined in the fellowship of suffering. Defeat is doubly hard when victory had seemed so near. The Australians fighting advance to the sea cut off a whole German division and opened the way for the great breakthrough. The Desert Fox has met his match at last. Advance, the signal the 8th Army has so long awaited. The Desert Air Force hammers the retreating columns mercilessly. At last, the way is open for the British armour. Montgomery watches as his tanks race forward to engage the German rearguard, desperately trying to cover the escape of a beaten army. For Rommel, there will be no more victories. His panzers make a last stand, but they cannot check the victorious onrush of the British armour. Ceaselessly and relentlessly, the Air Force harassed the retreating enemy. A heavy toll is taken. Everything that moves is attacked. The open desert offers no cover to the fleeing enemy. With all resistance now broken, the British tanks stream westward in hot pursuit. Wrecked and burning German and Italian tanks litter the desert. General Ritter von Thoma, captured commander of the Africa Corps, is escorted to a meeting with General Montgomery. 30,000 prisoners, including 9 generals, have been taken. 350 tanks and 400 guns have been captured or destroyed. 4 cracked German divisions and 8 Italian divisions have ceased to exist as effective fighting formations. Alamein was a great turning point in the war. Before Alamein, said Churchill, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat. It was these Australians from every state of the Commonwealth who made this great victory possible. The magnificent forward drive of the Australian 9th Division, said Churchill, achieved by ceaseless, bitter fighting, swung the whole battle in our favour. Australians take no part in the long pursuit which follows. They cannot. They are fought out. The chase is led by the New Zealanders, who have played an heroic part in the Battle of El Alamein, but who have suffered less than their ANZAC comrades. There was no apartheid at Alamein. The Axis retreat has become a rout. The 8th Army pours westward in pursuit. The tide of war has turned with a vengeance. Signposts of victory. No need to worry about air attack and dispersal of vehicles now. The Luftwaffe, which has had things its own way for so long, has been shot out of the sky. Sidi Barrani. The 8th Army is well into enemy territory now. November the 13th, 1942. This is an occasion in which the 9th Division, the Rats of Tobruk, would dearly love to have shared. Tobruk has changed hands for the last time. The pace of the pursuit quickens. Now, for the third time, the British Army enters Benghazi. There will be no more Benghazi derbies. This time, the British chase will not end until the Axis forces have been driven into the sea from Tunisia. Tripoli at last. In 3 months, the 8th Army has advanced 1,400 miles, and Tripoli is now in its hands. Enemy generals surrender the city to Montgomery. The Italian flag will never fly here again. But the 8th Army is driving on to Tunisia and final victory in Africa. And meanwhile, in Gaza, the 9th Division parade before General Alexander. The general addresses the men who made this victory possible.
The Battle of El Alamein will make history, and you are in the proud position of having taken a major part in that great victory. Your reputation as fighters has always been famous, but I do not believe that you have ever fought with greater bravery or distinction than you did during that battle when you broke the German and Italian armies in the Western Desert. But wherever you may be, my thoughts will always go with you. And I shall follow your fortunes with interest and your successes with admiration. But there is one thought which I shall cherish above all others, and it is this. Under my command fought the 9th Australian Division.
They had fought, they had suffered, they had died. They had upheld most valiantly the tradition of ANZAC.